In the mornings, the Parisian stalls by the bridges smell not of romance, but of rancid fat, smoke, and cheap incense. Between the belts and pendants hang narrow strips of fabric, sold as belts of passion. On the counter are bags of powders, bottles of cloudy liquid, and bundles of dried herbs. Adult townspeople approach them as they would a stall selling onions or salt, leave their coins, and take away what is promised to them as a remedy for loneliness and jealousy. But behind the words of love lies something else: heavy metals, harsh tinctures, impurities that darken the eyes, burn the throat, and destroy the insides. Greetings. This is a story about how, in 14th century Paris, the market for love magic clashed with the parliament, the highest royal court, which saw in belts of passion and love potions not only sin, but also fraud involving poisons. It is about how the case files recorded not an abstract fight against love, but poisonings, deception, and disputes about where tradition ends and crime begins. Write in the comments which city and country you are from, and whether you have ever considered love spells to be harmless magic, or have always suspected them to be dangerous. I wish you attentive and somewhat unsettling listening. Behind the beautiful promises, here are real adult bodies that get sick, are maimed, and die. Paris, in the second half of the 14th century, lives in the shadow of plague, war, and taxes. The townspeople have already seen entire streets die out in a few short years, lists of the dead added to church records, and bread become more expensive in the markets. Adult men and women lose their spouses, lovers, crafts, and connections, and against this backdrop, the desire to retain or regain someone's affection ceases to be a mere whim. Where families break up, marriage becomes a transaction, and the future seems uncertain. Any means of retaining a partner's attention is seen as the last chance to avoid falling into loneliness. Love magic here does not look like a separate underground market of passion. It is the extreme zone of the same urban service economy. In the same neighborhoods where apothecaries, barbers, and doctors live, there are people who, for a fee, prepare belts, ointments, and powders for love. Often, these are herbalists, old craftsmen, or lower clergy who earn extra money by writing special prayers on strips of cloth. They use the same ingredients as conventional medicine: wine, vinegar, spices, fats, and metal salts. Only here, all this is promised, not as a cure for stomachache or skin rash, but as a means of warming a cold heart or tempering destructive jealousy. We know what these remedies actually contained, not from advertisements, but from court cases where something went particularly wrong. Parliamentary records contain stories of how, after drinking a heart-strengthening beverage, an adult man began vomiting, developed a fever and excruciating pain, and died a few days later. Another case describes a woman who wore a leather belt soaked in a special mixture for several weeks and ended up with purulent ulcers, fever, and the threat of gangrene. When the case reached the royal judges, it turned out that the words of love concealed harsh mixtures, tinctures of strong wine and vinegar, with the addition of powder from stinging insects, unrefined copper, lead, and excessive doses of spices. Medical knowledge at the time already allowed one to distinguish between the effects of a mild stimulant and the symptoms of poisoning. University doctors wrote that some substances in small quantities warm up the body, while in large quantities they destroy the liver, kidneys, and blood vessels. Those who were summoned to Parliament as experts based on the descriptions of the symptoms confidently stated that what they were dealing with was not the result of a miraculous love spell, but rather a common case of poisoning by a crude mixture. From the court's point of view, this shifted the case from the realm of superstition to that of harm to health. The question was not whether it was permissible to try to bewitch an adult, but whether the seller had the right to risk his life under the guise of tradition. Craftsmen who were caught in such situations did indeed try to defend themselves by referring to customs. They claimed that their recipes had been passed down from their elders, that no one had complained for many years, and that both rich and poor people came to them. In small neighborhoods where reputation was everything, accusations of poisoning destroyed several levels of trust at once: personal income, family position, and workshop status. In their eyes, Parliament was interfering not in the sphere of crime, but in the sphere of customary relations between seller and buyer, where risk was considered part of the game. But for royal justice, this was not a romantic market, but an area where the weakness of the law produced too many dead bodies. The Paris Parliament was used to dealing with violence, debts, and counterfeit coins. Love potions and passion belts fell into the same category as another form of deception, where customers were not only deprived of their money, but also poisoned. Where the love potion had no effect, the case was dismissed with private complaints. Where it left a corpse or a cripple, the court considered it not a blow to love, but a violation of order and harm to the king's subjects. This is where the line begins that will eventually lead to bans on witchcraft services and fines for harm to health, and the myth that the city beat for love will begin to diverge from the paper trails showing how the authorities tried to stop the market for toxic recipes covered up by the language of passion. When judges examine specific cases, the language of passion quickly dissolves into descriptions of symptoms. Cases do not come to Parliament with beautiful names, but with dry formulas. An adult man or woman died after taking a remedy purchased from so-and-so. Below, it is noted that before death, there was a burning thirst, abdominal pain, darkening of the face, and weakness in the legs. Sometimes it is noted that the victim complained of a throbbing pain in the head and a strange sweet taste in the mouth that did not go away with either water or wine. To a modern toxicologist, this would sound like a case of severe poisoning, but to 14th century judges, it was a sign that they were dealing not with a simple, failed love spell, but with a dangerous mixture bordering on actual poison. Typically, such a case would begin not in Parliament, but in the lower courts. First, relatives or neighbors would file a complaint with the city courts, indicating not only the name of the love spell master, but also the circumstances. How many times the victim had visited the shop, how much he had paid, and how his condition had changed after taking the remedy. Often, the motive of jealousy or despair is also mentioned. The adult customer was afraid of losing their partner, spouse, or client. This part of the story is almost always recorded in a roundabout way, through retelling, but even here, the structure of the market is visible. The same people went to the same people for a strengthening drink, calming powder, or belt that protects love. When it comes to parliamentary registration, two more figures are included in the text: a doctor and sometimes a pharmacist. Based on the description of the symptoms, the doctor determines that the body has received too many hot and dry substances, causing poison to accumulate in the blood and organs. The pharmacist can recognize cheap heavy metals, unpurified arsenic, and overly concentrated tinctures by the smell and appearance of the mixture. In one case, it is indicated that traces of a substance commonly used to poison rats were found in the powder. In another, it was found that the fragrant ointment for the belt was made not from purified fat, but from rancid residues mixed with caustic salts. It is important for the court not only to understand that the remedy killed the person, but also to establish that the craftsman knowingly used substances that are considered dangerous in known doses. For the defendants, this becomes a trap. While the conversation was about prayers, spells, and tradition, they had the opportunity to refer to customs and ignorance of the consequences. As soon as experts get involved, love magic is renamed improperly prepared medicine, or the deliberate use of poison. Craftsmen continue to insist that they acted like their predecessors, that it has always been done this way, that adult buyers were aware of the risks. But in the eyes of Parliament, tradition does not justify harm to health. Moreover, many of these craftsmen do not belong to recognized guilds of pharmacists or surgeons, which means they are not subject to any control. The guild system in Paris plays a special role here. Official pharmacists and specialists have long sought to obtain a monopoly on the sale of complex mixtures. They complain that herbalists and sorcerers, who are not members of the guilds, are taking away their customers and damaging their reputation by selling dirty and dangerous products. In their reports, love magic is described not as a competing belief, but as an illegal business. It is important for them to draw a line. What they prepare according to the recipes of university doctors is considered medicine. Everything else is quackery. This is convenient for Parliament. Under the guise of caring for order in the crafts, it gains another lever for control over the city market. Thus, love magic finds itself at the intersection of several forces. On the one hand, there is the demand from adults who are willing to pay for a chance to change someone's feelings. On the other hand, there are small craftsmen and herbalists who have been earning a living for centuries from services that straddle the line between medicine, prayer, and conspiracy. On the third side are guilds and university doctors fighting for monopoly. On the fourth side is the royal court, which cares not only about moral order, but also about preventing the city from turning into a territory of uncontrolled poisoning. In this scheme, moral accusations of unclean love are loudly proclaimed in sermons, but in the case records, the main emphasis is on the harm caused to health and on deception. Sometimes cases of love spells merge with cases of direct poisoning. In several cases, the defendants admit that they used the same mixtures as for eliminating enemies, only in smaller doses. The difference between a love potion and poison becomes so subtle that it disappears for the court. If an adult dies after drinking such a beverage, the contents of the jar are irrelevant, whether they are called love magic or secret medicine. In essence, it is murder or attempted murder. Here, Parliament no longer shows leniency. It imposes severe punishments, up to and including the death penalty or exile, and in city chronicles, such cases are recorded alongside high-profile crimes, without separating them into the category of superstition. However, not every case ends with the gallows or the stake. Much more often, it is a matter of fines, confiscation of property, and a ban on practicing the craft. Judges take into account whether the harm was predictable, how many people were affected, and how long the practitioner had been engaged in such trade. If adult clients suffered for years but did not die, the punishment may take the form of market cleansing. The shop is closed, the stock is destroyed, and the craftsman himself is banned from living in the city. From a practical point of view, this is the same result as religious excommunication. The person loses clients, connections, and sometimes even a roof over their head. This everyday harshness reveals the nerve of history. Public myth likes to paint 14th-century Paris as a city that cruelly beat down the very idea of love, interfered with feelings, and prohibited any attempts to control affection. But parliamentary records show otherwise. The court is a place where romantic explanations are quickly stripped away like a dirty veil. Underneath are mixtures of ingredients, symptoms of poisoning, disputes between workshops and disenfranchised craftsmen. Where the market sold the promise of bewitching, the court saw first and foremost an unlicensed experiment on the body of an adult human being. And the fact that this experiment was covered up with talk of passion made it even more dangerous in the eyes of the authorities. By the middle of the 14th century, enough cases had accumulated in the records of the Paris Parliament that judges began to see a recurring pattern. Similar stories emerged in different neighborhoods. An adult would buy a small packet of powder, a bottle of thick liquid, or a belt with knots sewn onto it from a knowledgeable woman or a craftsman. After a while, the target of the love spell falls ill. At first, this is attributed to common ailments, fatigue, fever, poor food. But when, after the belts of passion and drops mixed into wine or soup, people begin to experience severe abdominal pain, vomiting, upset, and in some cases death, the words about magic in the protocols gradually give way to words about poison and fraud. Parliamentary lawyers saw before them not a romantic conspiracy, but a series of suspicious poisonings wrapped up in the language of love. At the level of everyday city life, this magical economy is simple. There are those who sell hope, herbalists, barbers, healers, and small craftsmen who combine their main trade with the sale of powders and amulets. There are those who buy, adult women and men dissatisfied with their marriages, desperate to achieve reciprocity, afraid of losing their lovers, wanting to persuade someone to enter into a union or reconciliation. Paris has survived the plague, wars, rising prices, and crop failures. In such an atmosphere, any means that promises to regain control over at least someone's feelings seems tempting. A shop where, along with incense, ointments, and remedies for toothache, there are belts of passion and heart powders, looks like just another outlet for urban medicine, only aimed not at the body but at desire. But the composition of these remedies is far from harmless. Parliamentary records contain descriptions of what is seized from the accused: bags of bright yellow powder, vials of thick liquid that smells of vinegar and burnt metal, mixtures of crushed herbs with unidentifiable crystals. Doctors are asked to assess whether these mixtures contain dangerous substances. They talk about heavy impurities, potent resins, and doses that are harmful to the stomach and liver. In an era when even legal drugs often straddle the line between treatment and poisoning, Parliament is particularly concerned when such components end up in the hands of people who are not bound by professional regulations and are not accountable to the Medical Faculty Corporation. The mechanism of love recipes in these cases is predictable. The seller claims that the powder should be mixed into a drink or food, put on a belt and worn secretly, attached to the body under clothing. They explain that the victim is already inclined towards the buyer, and the potion will only enhance their natural attraction. If everything goes well, a love affair does develop, but not because of the powder. People meet at the market or in church, agree, and become close in the usual ways. Then the seller says that his remedy worked. If everything ends in illness or death, excuses are made. The potion was allegedly spoiled. The person violated the specified procedure. Demons intervened. As a result, responsibility is blurred, and the money has already been paid. Parliamentary judges approach these cases differently. In their logic, it is not the result in the form of reciprocal feelings that is important, but material harm, pain, injury, death. They see that under the guise of love magic lies gross manipulation, where the desperation of adult clients is turned into a source of income, and dangerous substances into a factory of accidents. A number of cases explicitly state that after drinking love potion wine, the victims experienced severe cramps, lost consciousness, and were unable to get out of bed for several days. The survivors came to with damaged health, while the deceased became the subject of investigations in which, alongside accusations of witchcraft, the words poison, fraud, and harm to health increasingly surfaced. The conflict intensified when Parliament attempted to draw a line between tradition and crime. Sellers of magical services claimed that they were merely continuing old customs, using herbs that had been used for centuries to warm the blood, enhance fertility, and relieve cold melancholy. Barbers and herbalists refer to oral recipes passed down through workshops and families. They claim that their powders are no more dangerous than the usual infusions that doctors prescribe to patients. For them, parliamentary intervention is a blow to their economy and an attempt to take away the last tool ordinary townspeople have to influence their own personal lives. But the records show that the judges are primarily concerned not with tradition, but with the lack of control and the risk of poisoning. The cases mention instances where crushed metal shavings, suspicious minerals, and ingredients that pharmacy regulations prohibit from being used without strict dosing and medical supervision were found in love powders. At the same time, there have been cases of blindness, tooth loss, and chronic stomach pain in people who have been using infusions and pills bought from unofficial magicians for a long time. Doctors note that some of these symptoms coincide with the known signs of chronic poisoning with heavy substances. For Parliament, this becomes an argument that leaves no room for romanticizing the love potion market. The political background also plays an important role. Paris lives under the rule of the king, but the real legal work of regulating urban space falls to Parliament. Cases of theft, violence, disputes between guilds, and violations of statutes pass through its hands. In this stream of cases, love magic initially appears to be something marginal, but as cases accumulate, it becomes a noticeable theme. Too often, the words passion are followed by the crude use of poisonous mixtures, and too often, the victims are not only the customers themselves, but also the people to whom they mix the potions. For the authorities, concerned with stability, this is a problem of security, not of morality. Seeing that Parliament is beginning to punish the sale of passion belts and suspicious potions, urban artisans are trying to shift the debate back to the realm of tradition and freedom of trade. They complain that the court is interfering in what has always existed on the market: herbs for male potency, ointments to raise blood heat, and charms for luck in love. Their words betray a fear that if Parliament restricts magic today, tomorrow it may encroach on other areas where artisans are accustomed to deciding for themselves what and how they offer to their customers. But the documents show that the judges are trying to draw the line not at the boundary of secret knowledge, but at the boundary of measurable harm. Where the recipe is a mixture of common spices and herbs, the punishment is milder and it is more a case of fraud. Where potentially lethal ingredients are found in the potions, the case is classified as a threat to life. Meanwhile, the myth lives on in the streets and shops. Townspeople tell each other that the authorities have banned love, that the court punishes those who turn to magic because it fears free feelings. In these retellings, the words about poisons and serious consequences disappear, leaving only an image: stern men in robes crushing the dreams of adult women, and men who want to change their fate. The gap between this myth and the dry lines of the registers becomes another source of tension in the city. The archives record the judge's motivation: to protect the health and wallets of the townspeople from dangerous and expensive counterfeits. The square remembers only the cries of tradition, the right to love, and witchcraft, which were met with whips and fines. The minutes of parliamentary sessions quickly reveal how cases of love magic bring to light something that is not at all romantic. Judges increasingly summon adult doctors and pharmacists, showing them confiscated powders and tinctures. They recognize heavy impurities by their smell and color: crushed metals, rancid fats, strong resins. For university medicine of that era, it is clear that these are slow-acting poisons, which in small doses can still be used as medicines, but in the hands of untrained craftsmen become a source of chronic pain, fever, and sudden fainting in adult clients. Witness testimony completes the picture. An adult who orders a love spell initially sees only what they want to see. The object of their passion becomes softer and more compliant. This is achieved through gifts, family pressure, and fear of ruining their reputation. But then, the bewitched person begins to experience stomach pains, weakness, vomiting, and weight loss. In the hope of strengthening the effect of the potion, they continue to add the infusion, increasing the dose. There are documented cases of people who stopped going to work, collapsed in the street, and died after several weeks of such love treatment. At these moments, talk of feelings disappears from the parliament, leaving only signs of poisoning, damage to health, and property disputes between families. Legal language is changing. Where previously the case title was witchcraft and superstition, another combination is gradually appearing: fraud and bodily harm. The verdicts emphasize not only the prohibition of magical practices, but also the fact of selling dangerous mixtures under false pretenses. In some cases, the punishment is interpreted as fraud. The love powder turns out to be a harmless mixture of flour and spices, and the case is about extorting money. In others, when doctors find obvious toxic impurities and the death or serious illness of an adult, the case is classified as poisoning with corresponding harsh penalties. For judges, this is fundamental. The city shows that the main object of protection is not abstract morality, but the living bodies and wallets of its inhabitants. Craftsmen respond with references to old customs, claiming that there have always been remedies that warm the blood and soften the heart. They feel that Parliament is encroaching on traditional family knowledge and folk medicine. But the case files stubbornly point to specific cases. Adults who, after courses of passion belts and infusions, lose their health, their families, and sometimes their lives. It is these episodes that become the argument in favor of banning entire classes of recipes, restricting the trade in certain substances, and transferring control over them to pharmaceutical corporations and university doctors. Love magic finally falls into the same category as the sale of poisons, and Parliament confirms that fines and more severe penalties are imposed not for attempting to control feelings, but for using dangerous compounds and knowingly making false promises of power over another's will. At the level of urban conversation, all this is condensed into a simple legend. The authorities banned belts of passion and struck a blow against love. People recount scenes of searches and executions without delving into the details of expert reports and legal formulations. But archival documents provide a different perspective. The 14th century Paris Parliament intervened where the market for love potions intersected with the market for poisons. It did not abolish desire as such, but sought to limit the right to profit from it at the cost of the ruined bodies of adult citizens. It is in this gap between rumor and record that the myth of a city that punished love is born, while the document reveals a more prosaic and grim task: to protect residents from toxic recipes disguised as passion. Several decades after the most high-profile trials, it is clear how these decisions have eaten into the urban organism. The statutes of Parisian pharmacists now include provisions prohibiting the manufacture of secret potions without a clear list of ingredients. University lectures on medicine paid more attention to poisons and antidotes, describing how to distinguish medicine from slow poisoning. Doctors increasingly mention adult patients who come in with chronic pain and admit to drinking heart medicine bought from people who are not licensed to sell pharmaceuticals. For them, this is not a novel about unhappy love, but statistics on damaged organs, burned mucous membranes, and impaired breathing. The market for love potions is not disappearing. It is moving to darker places. Shops in plain sight are no longer openly displaying belts and amulets. Merchants are resorting to whispering, meetings through acquaintances, and handing over packages in back alleys. Where before a buyer could at least see the seller's face in a bright market, now they risk dealing with people who are not protected by a workshop, a neighborhood, or fear of the authorities. Court records show a shift. Fewer high-profile trials with demonstrative executions, more rare but serious cases where love, poison, and calculation are so intertwined that it is impossible to untangle them completely. In city sermons, the theme of love magic is used in its own way. Preachers remind adult parishioners that any desire to subjugate another's will is fraught with punishment, not only in the other world, but also here. Fines, shame, and risk to health. They retell well-known cases, but smooth over the legal aspects, turning them into instructive stories about punished recklessness. Thus, on one end of the spectrum, there is the myth of a city that punishes the very attempt to buy love, and on the other, there is the reality in which judges and doctors continue to deal with poisoning, fraud, and property disputes. For artisans whose names appear in the registers, the outcome is always concrete. Some pay large fines and lose the right to trade, their shops being taken over by other, more cautious neighbors. Others go through prison, shackles, shameful parades through the streets, sometimes even the death penalty, if the court finds that they knowingly used strong poisons. Their adult clients are left with the consequences. Some recover after a long illness, some continue to live with weakened bodies, and some die, leaving their families with debts and without a breadwinner. In each such case, love magic turns out to be only the top layer, under which lies a simple scheme. Someone decided that someone else's affection was worth risking someone else's life. From a historical distance, this story sounds particularly disturbing precisely because it offers no consoling resolution. The Paris of parliamentary records becomes neither a city that has conquered superstition nor a space of pure rationality. It remains a place where the desire of adults to interfere in each other's feelings is confronted with boundaries drawn by judges and doctors. The paper shows that the authorities' intervention was not directed against love as such, but against a market where dangerous mixtures were sold for money with the promise of control over another person's will. The way this reality was later turned into a myth about a city that banned belts of passion speaks to the familiar fear of acknowledging a simpler and more unpleasant fact. Sometimes, the authorities protect not morality, but your heart, literally, from the contents of a small dirty vial that someone bought so that you would no longer have the right to refuse.